So welcome, everybody. We're getting ready to start now with our regulatory coalition session this morning. And I would like to start by sharing some housekeeping messages. Veronica, if I can have the next slide, please. Is it the same link from the Ethics Coalition? Yes. So for all of you that are registered, you should have received the link, and that is why you are connected already, actually. There is another link for the session on the 25th, and you're going to get the barcodes a little bit later in the slides. As we're not going to be streaming the main whole MedTech Conference 2022 program that are not pertaining directly to the MDRC work. Simultaneous interpretation again keeps being available, English, Spanish, and Portuguese. And for the attendees here in the room, just a reminder that in case you decide not to speak in English while making your comments, if you can allow for the interpreters to interpret it using like short sentences, so we will have a better quality in our interpretation. The Q&A feature is always working for the attendees via Zoom. So we invite you to post your questions so we may have this as a very interactive session. And as usual, microphones for the Zoom attendees are closed, but you can post your questions and comments again through the Q&A feature. And also you can request for your microphones to be open if you would like to make a comment live. Next slide, please, Veronica. So with these, I want to start with kind of like a summary on what we have been doing as coalition in the past few months. And for the first is like our institutional engagement keeps growing and growing. And this is something that we find that it is really a very strong component for the coalition, because that is an opportunity for us to continue aligning on the long run objectives that we have that has to do with reaching regulatory convergence globally. So I won't read them, you have them there, and you will be able to go through all of them also while getting access to the slides as they are going to be posted in our website. Next slide, please. So out of what we have been doing regarding capacity building in the last 18 months, I would say, has to do with many different technical topics. But as you may recall, what we decided as the main strategy for the coalition is to base everything that we do on good regulatory practices as they are legally mandatory for the countries that are members of the coalition and many more in the world, of course, on the technical barriers to trade agreement, but also under the recommendations of the World Health Organization. So that is what we basically start doing whenever we do any capacity building before any technical topic is managed, because that is the only way that we think that we will be able to fix in the long run the problems. If we fix a technical problem based on a one-to-one agreement that is not based on having fixed the root cause of the problem, that generally has to do with not having properly applied good regulatory practices, it is going to happen again really soon. I mean, next time that partners are not the same in the table, that is going to be there again. So this is why we put a lot of emphasis and a lot of effort, and we're really very grateful for the partnership that we have with the World Trade Organization and the World Health Organization, taking part on the sessions that we have where we are developing capacities in these items. So everything else that we do, you can read in the slide, we're doing it around good regulatory practices. And every single time when we talk about any specific technical item, we refer them either to international standards or international reference. And people should be bored of us repeating that day in and day out. But we will continue to do that until everybody is doing that there's no need for us to keep reminding it. So next slide, please, Veronica. And if we go through to our geographical scope, beyond what we have been doing through the coalition in Latin America, through the MDRC project, now we are really proud to say that we have already started capacity building activities in Africa, concretely in South Africa. And even though you cannot notice it in the map very well, but yes, South Africa is highlighted and Indonesia is also highlighted. And we are developing programs also for them. So now we have reached out to 3 continents. 27 countries have been attending several of the sessions that we have organized. That have been 40 in the last 18 months. That I think it is a lot, and we have covered really huge audience. We have had over 2,300 regulatory authorities attending our webinars, and over 4,600 private sector representatives to all of those. And that means that if we just make a quick average of like couple of hours a session, that in general terms they are more than that, we have had like over 500,000 hours of training. And if we average it by the number of attendees, we have like more than 80 hours of training for every single individual that has been attending. So I think that is something that it is valuable. And probably something to add to that value is that all of this information, all of these materials are available through the website. So they are there to stay. They are there to reach out many more people. So we really invite you to broadcast that it is already there. We have a newsletter. We have an audience of over like 1,500 individuals already registered in the newsletter, that they are informed about what we are doing and the availability of all these materials. But it is always important that you can voice that through the member companies in the associations and the companies that are represented here to help us spread the voice, spread the news, because that's a lot of effort. That's a lot of really very, very valuable knowledge that is available just as far as a click in our computer. So in gender balance, I think in the regulatory area, we have kind of like a different challenge as in most of different areas. Gender balance is the other way around us compared in different areas. So we have a good contribution to the global gender balance. Next slide, please. And just highlighting for a little bit on Colombia, that would have been probably like the best demonstrated practice up to now. And we will have Susan helping us getting into further details on what is going on through the liaison figure that we have in Colombia under the MDRC project. And this is very impressive. I mean, we agreed with the Ministry of Health and INVIMA on addressing the topics that are included there, decrees 4725 and 3770 that are critical because those are the basic regulations for medical devices and IVDs, good manufacturing practices that is missing in there, clinical research and emergency use authorization. We have multi-interinstitutional activity in there that has been really best demonstrated practice for the continent. And we have had over 160 meetings over there and having like close to 900 attendees over there. So people is listening every single week about good regulatory practices, how to deal with the technical topics under a good regulatory process. So really, thank you very much, Susan, for leading the work in there. Next slide, please. And in here, it's like what have been the most important outcomes up to date under the activities that we're running through the MDRC project. So for Colombia, a really great achievement is that the Ministry of Health recently published their official procedure that includes good regulatory practices requirements as for any piece of regulation that is developed by the MOH should follow good regulatory process, and with that, ensuring that good regulatory practices are in compliance. Way to go. It was just recently published. We have been requested to support them to train all personnel at the Ministry of Health. That is something that we're going to be doing as well. And the good news is that the National Planning Department, that is responsible in the country for the implementation of good regulatory practices, is going to be adopting it, and it's going to be implementing it for all regulatory agencies at every single government level. For whomever has the responsibility to regulate, they're going to be implementing this. So this is really something that we're very proud of and that we're really very thankful for, again, leadership from Susan, but also the openness both at the Ministry of Health and the National Planning Department to work together with us, with the project, in order to make this a reality. As for Mexico, also upon the acknowledgement of COFEPRIS and the Mexican Pharmacopoeia, that you are probably aware that are two joint yet independent institutions to develop regulations. Last year in November, also as a result of a series of capacity building workshops that we had on good regulatory practices, they acknowledged that there's no way they can demonstrate that they are in compliance with legal obligations on good regulatory practices. So they came to us a few months later to request for help to develop a checklist that would include all legal obligations that they do have through the TBT agreement, USMCA, Pacific Alliance, and internally through the quality infrastructure law and the regulatory improvement law. We have developed that. We have delivered that to COFEPRIS and Pharmacopoeia, and they are in the process of making their final adjustments and comments. So we may have that incorporated within the quality management system of COFEPRIS. And for the NUM 001, that is a technical regulation that has to go through all the good regulatory practices process. That is the one that defines the way that the Mexican Pharmacopoeia can be updated to be included in the regulatory agenda for 2023. May they be able to incorporate that. And as for the quality infrastructure law, as you're also probably aware, there's a long overdue implementing regulation. And we got the request also from the former general director of DGN to propose our ideas in order to address our concerns on the quality infrastructure law through the implementing regulation. Political changes occurred. So now we are starting over with the process, and we are going to be sharing this proposal next Friday with Raul Romero that John probably reminds, and many of you that was with us at LA back in June. So we're going to be presenting that to him. So we're expecting he's going to be very well equipped by the time the new director shows up in the office. For Peru, even though it has been very challenging to work with them under the MDRC project, what we have managed to do is to produce, based on their 3 annual review of procedures, feedback on all the procedures that are related to medical devices under DGMIT. We have already delivered them both to DGMIT and the Regulatory Quality Analysis Department. We are scheduling up a meeting with them so we can go and review in depth our proposals. And for Africa, we're really very proud, and Jesus, thank you very much for the support for the GMTA to open a fully dedicated Africa working group. And the first, as I was mentioning, capacity building in South Africa and in Indonesia. We have shared also the checklist, the work that we are doing into developing this checklist on TBT GRP obligations. They are very interested in that. We are sharing that with them, and we have also started to develop capacity building activities. Next slide, please. And as position papers, as you may probably recall, we have developed a position paper for the semantic standard for Colombia that ended up, the regulation ended up being, I would say, sufficiently close to what we wanted as for the local industry. And Andy was very supportive on this to define, okay, let's live with these and let's see what happens next. We still have some concerns, but we will be addressing them by the time they come up. With Chile, we have been working on Ley de Fármacos II, that is right now kind of like frozen at the Congress. And now we're starting to work on a couple of position papers, actually 3, that are related to new regulations that are being published that have not followed any of the good regulatory process at all, that are mandating requirements to be fulfilled in order to get authorizations to commercialize several products. And now they are starting to talk about UDI traceability. For Ecuador traceability, and we are also very proud that through that work, and there was really a multi-sectoral, multi-institutional effort, we managed to get the piece of regulation withdrawn. Now we have another challenge that we're going to start to address because our governments are very creative. They find different ways to get into the same solution, but if they don't follow the proper process, that is not going to work either. So that is kind of like our key message to them. And for Mexico, as you are also aware, we put together a position paper on good manufacturing practices and the concerns that we have, that we are all aware of that. And the good news is that now it is in the agenda of the November session of the TBT committee. So that is going to be discussed over there. So we are expecting to have good news after that. Next slide, please. And then regarding the program for the next couple of days, Next slide, please. So just a reminder, you have already received all this information in your emails, but we have the coding here for you to register. So we will have today, right after I'm done with this, the workshop on self-testing. We will have the lunch for all of us attending here. Then we will have a GMTA meeting for which we, of course, invite all GMTA members to be present in the room. For the ones that are not GMTA members, but would be willing to attend the session, we would only kind of request for you to take the seats that are behind, right at the walls. So GMTA members are going to be seated in the table. And then we will have the international reception. As for tomorrow, the program is fully dedicated to the MedTech conference. So we will have the global regulatory panel. Then we'll have the LATAM, healthcare compliance and integrity outlook. Then we will have, after the plenary launch, we will have the panel on the Inter-American regulatory convergence. Then there's the session on EU MDR IVDR that lots of us are very interested on as well. And then there's the Boston reception. Next slide, please. And then for October 25th, we will have like the overtime for the panel in the on the Inter-American regulatory convergence. We know that there's never enough time in a panel to go into details, so we want to open up the opportunity to continue the discussion with the speakers that we will have on Monday. Then we will have an open session where we're going to be sharing what has been the progress done up to date under the MDRC program. And then we will have the reception in the evening. And on October 26th, we will have only a closed session with the national regulatory authorities of the MDRC project countries. And then in the afternoon, we are all invited to the town hall from the FDA and CDRH. Next slide, please. And with this, oh, I'm sorry. And during the lunch times, we will have plenary sessions. The one tomorrow, it is where we will have the FDA commissioner.
Or Tuesday, maybe.
I'm sorry, it is Tuesday. So, but lunch are the plenary sessions that we are really inviting you not to miss. They're going to be really very strong content sessions. So with this, I would like then to introduce Leticia Fonseca for quick opening comments for our workshop on self-testing.
Good morning, everyone. I apologize for my voice, but I'm going to speak slowly so you can understand. I'm Leticia Fonseca. I'm the Vice Secretary of the Inter-American Coalition for Regulatory Convergence. I work with Aladiv as well. As Sandra said, the activity for development has a lot of essential components of our commitments of medical devices. The topic today is to discuss self-testing. And why self-testing? Because even though the availability of self-testing for infectious diseases like HIV is a priority, and it has been since 2012, when FDA approved it, the use of self-testing is still a very controversial topic in our countries. The COVID-19 pandemic brought this discussion to light again. And the self-test with COVID, we were able to have a new tool to broaden the access to diagnostic. And this way, we were able to prevent the virus and further diagnose people that had the virus at the time. Dr. Rosane Peeling, who's a world reference in infectious disease diagnosis, we are going to hear from her. We're going to have lessons learned from people who work with self-testing around the world. We will also have the presentation from our references here in Brazil, talking about our experience in self-testing. In Brazil's experience in working with self-testing, especially for HIV, I hope you can also take this discussion into your countries, and I would like to hear what you have from your side. And on the 25th in the morning, we are going to talk about similar topics. And without further ado, we are going to now continue with our conference. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I'm not there with you, but I will be with you on our next event. Thank you.
Thank you, Leticia. And now I'd like to welcome Carlos Gouveia to share with us his remarks on Aladif and its role towards regulatory convergence. Carlos.
Thanks a lot, Sandra. Thanks, Leticia. It's really a great pleasure to be here. And before anything, I would just like to introduce Aladif. Aladif was created 12 years ago, and it's actually part of a constellation. It's really enough. Nobody can do anything alone. And this is the work of coalition that we can see. In the case of Aladif, it was created 12 years ago, and exactly as a kind of challenge that Rosana posed to us, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it. And it's always working together with CBDL, the In Vitro Diagnostic Association in Brazil, the GDA, which is the Global Diagnostic Alliance, Audimed, which is our alliance for medical devices in the Americas, and Ethics Health Institute in Brazil, ABIS, which is the Innovative Industry for Healthcare Alliance as well, and not less important with the academia, and then London School and IDC, International Diagnostic Center, have been great supporter. Next slide. It was, next slide. Yes, it was created in Annecy after one very important exercise about what is the challenge that we can have and actually accomplish afterwards. And for Americas, the idea was how we can take better or higher quality tests at a sustainable way, in a sustainable way, but also in a good price, a good level. And Rosanna posed that, and with our colleagues from different countries in America, we created the idea, the concept, and it was finally founded, and Augusto will remember, at Anvisa after a letter of Brasilia. So a kind of commitment of all different stakeholders. And Veronica, you can go with all the slides, yeah. Several workshops, international workshops, not only in Brazil, but in Peru, in Paraguay, in Canada, were taken ahead exactly to show the importance of regulatory convergence, as harmonization was something quite impossible to reach, but we could really work on common grounds and try to reach more accessible tests in good quality. Next slide. We got a lot of access to different media. Next slide. And the support of very highly reputable stakeholders like PAHO, WHO, FIND. Next slide. And then you are going to see some of the sessions that we hold in different occasions. Next. With Ministry of Health, Fiocruz, regulators from different countries. Next. Here in Anvisa, FDA. Next. You are going to see that we were quite young by them, like we were saying, Jesus, but it shows that it's a very nice way to follow because, yeah, that was a strong bridge indeed at the Paraná in Curitiba. Next slide. That was in Canada. Next slide. That was in Paraguay. Next slide. This was in Canada at the site of IMDRF meeting. Next slide. In Ottawa. That was in São Paulo. Next slide. Yeah, this is just to show how much you can achieve by working together with different people from different areas, and really it makes a lot of difference. So the idea today, next slide. Next. it's really to show how we can engage. WHO took part with the COVID in some of the actions that we did. Next slide. The Clinical Pathology Society as well, clinical analysis, and all this is reflected in all the work that Aladiv is doing. You can follow up at our website some of the publications with the work that the Inter-America Coalition is doing, and we are fully supporting these initiatives. Next slide. And why? Next. Because what we know is that the future is not so far ahead, and we have indeed a very fluid situation, and technology is moving very fast, faster than we can even expect. Next. What was fiction today, next, is reality. And next. And reality that you can even wear. So we are with the wearables, it can be a simple watch or something that can detect the fluids that are leaving your body. Next. The fact is that we have high technology embedded even in a very simple point of care tool, like a rapid immunochromatographic test. We all know, and despite all the discussions and preconceptions, that it can really change a lot our world. Point of care, it's not only rapid tests like the ones you saw, it can be a molecular biology instrument like this that can operate anywhere. So next, we're moving so fast that we have molecular biology in tools or devices smaller than a normal phone. Next. And that can be integrated, and that's part of our challenge with IT, integrated through a mobile phone. Next. And to provide, next, information also for epidemiological control, for instance. And that can work, and it has shown through COVID how it can support getting information for a public officer to take a decision, not only from a public system, but through a cooperation with the private sector as well. Next. A lot of this is shown in this publication that I invite you also to see. It's how the diagnostic market is working in Brazil with all the bottlenecks. And basically, after an analysis, we come with solutions. Next. At least proposals for solutions, showing that everything, a medical device or diagnostic that go from cradle to grave, following you during the whole lifetime, can really play a lot of contribution to the improvement of healthcare system, from a personalized medicine tool to control of microbiology in a hospital, giving the right test to the right person at the right time in the right environment. Next. That's the life cycle, which is very important for us to look, and it's from R&D and innovation with regulation, pre and post-market surveillance. Then the third step is exactly access, how you can actually have a health technology assessment in the public or in the private sector to implement that new device or test. And finally, monitoring the whole healthcare market. And this is quite dependent on incremental innovation other than disruptive. We do have disruptive, but a lot can come on the normal day by day, provided you really absorb all these conditions that you have using IT tools and others. Next. With that, I conclude this first part just for introducing to you all Aladiv. But again, Aladiv is not one standalone entity. It's really the work of us all together into different entities. And why is this so important? Because we do have to keep the integration as high level as possible, because we need to work with all the different specialties, especially for a sustainable use of diagnostics, with suppliers and payers, exactly to know that there is a sum of what everyone is doing. We do need to have integration with the whole healthcare system, and COVID showed that it's really mandatory, and IT can play a very important role in that. Health 4.0 is not a dream anymore, it's a reality. So the leadership for us all here is really to have in the discussion of the evolution of the sector. So we must monitor the technological horizon, not only for regulatory purposes only, but for access and for the whole system to be prepared. And the promotion of access, we're going to talk a lot in the next presentations, is really to promote the invisible patient to the healthcare system. COVID showed that despite our beliefs, we were not covering the whole market. There was lots of empty gaps, black holes in the market. And the revolution of the new revision of the health promotion models can really bring new opportunities for us. So let's discuss a little bit about what regulatory convergence can promote in terms of access to new products or products that exist that should be used properly. And that I will leave for the next slide, because the future is in our hands. So we are going to have a very interesting panel now about work on self-testing. The next presentation is going to be by Rosanna Peeling. She is the lead for diagnostics in the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. She has had a fantastic career in WHO, in TDR, and in many different organizations, always giving herself as much as she could to promote and this legacy for a better word in terms of diagnostic and access. So I stop here. Next slide eventually. Yeah, these are my date. And Rosanna, now the floor is going to be yours. Thanks a lot for accepting our invitation to be here to share a little bit of your knowledge.
I need a few
Thank-
minutes to
thank you.
download her deck, so please give me a couple of minutes. Thank
Okay.
you.
Sorry.
She's downloading the
Oh,
presentation.
okay.
So,
But it's the one that I
Yeah,
gave you
yeah,
this morning. Okay.
yeah.
Thank you very much for allowing me to share with you my thoughts about self-testing. There's been a lot of sort of, I guess, thinking about whether we should have done something about monkeypox years ago when we went and to different countries in Africa with the monkeypox outbreaks there, and why was no diagnostic developed? And if we had self-tests for monkeypox, we would be able to get on top of this outbreak right away. But hindsight, it's yeah. So what I'd like to do, I guess, what I'd like to do is to start by sharing with you the experience with self-testing for HIV. When I first discussed it with the CEO of OraSure, he said it took him 8 years of negotiation with FDA and CDC to even get the idea accepted, and went through a lot of different difficulty getting it approved. But I think for COVID, we've now seen that because of the need for better, faster diagnostics, because I will show you in my presentation that at first the SARS coronavirus was actually, the incubation period was, I think, between 3 to 7 days or 7 to anywhere to 21 days. So we had time to detect cases, do contact tracing, get the contacts tested, and then try to stop or ring fence a case from being transmitted into the community. But with the new variants, we are finding, for the first time, I remember getting a call from the Minister of Health from Singapore, and he said, we are seeing with this new variant, 3 generations of transmission in 10 days. There's no time, even as efficient as they were in Singapore, there was no time for them to do contact tracing in order to be able to ring fence the cases. And so, so they said, we really need to enable every citizen to do their part, that to test and to be able to stay home, especially in Asia, there's a lot of people who live in multi-generation homes. They need to protect the vulnerable, the elderly. And so that's how, self-testing became a policy in Singapore, but similarly in Europe as well. And I go through those presentations quickly. But WHO was very slow to recommend. And I remember many conversations with
Yes.
many people in WHO, and they said, so finally in January of 2020, we had our first meeting, and it was horrendous because by that time there were over 100 countries that have a policy for self-testing for COVID. And so what would a WHO recommendation mean, right? And so I guess the lessons learned was that, we needed this kind of leadership a lot earlier. But maybe for organizations like WHO, they want to be conservative. They didn't want to recommend anything that they may regret, because there were a few missteps about, especially modes of transmission, that WHO was questioned. Okay, so I'm now going to go through the slides very quickly. Next. Oh, that's the wrong slide. That's the wrong set. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's the one that I sent you this morning. Yeah. So I think for COVID, with UK and many other European countries leading the way, and also in US actually started earlier because the pandemic was a lot worse in the US at that time. And so with every country looking at doing studies to perform, to look at whether to have a policy for self-testing, the major question is, can people do the test well? And so there were many studies that were done. So during our WHO meeting, we were able to look at those and be very comfortable that people can actually reliably do the test. So next, please. Next slide, please. So as I said, I will use COVID and HIV as examples, and then talk about the process of how we came to have now WHO guidance on what to do and how many countries are now introducing self-tests, and then the future. Okay, next slide, please. So in 2012, FDA first approved an oral HIV self-test. And this is a picture taken from Time magazine, where they said, okay, you go to a pharmacy or a drugstore, and you could say you want to get aspirin, you want to get shampoo, and then you also can get HIV tests, which is great. And so it was necessary because as much as we try to get HIV tests accessible to everyone, in many countries, lab systems are not good enough. And even the rapid test doesn't penetrate into more remote areas. There's also a huge barrier with stigma. And so self-test, of course, it's a no-brainer when it comes to decreasing stigma, so that people can do the tests in their own homes, and also empowering individuals to take more responsibility for health. So those are the three main reasons for doing that. Next slide, please. Next, please. Yeah, so the WHO, FDA, US FDA, actually in considering whether these self-tests should be approved, set some minimum criteria for professional use of the self-tests, of these tests, oral tests, and home use. And for professional use, they said the minimum sensitivity and specificity need to be 98%. And for layperson's use, it should be 95% for sensitivity and specificity. Next, please. But the studies that were done found that although in professional use, the oral test performed really well against a blood test, but in lay use, the sensitivity was, the specificity was very good, but the sensitivity was below, was 92%, was below what was recommended. But then I think together with CDC, they worked out a risk-benefit analysis. Next slide, please. To show that if they introduced a test, in the first year of use, they expected something like 2,700,000 people would use the test. And of those, they would identify about 3,400 new infections that would otherwise not be identified. And they think that it could mean that about 3,000 HIV transmissions could be averted. And because of the healthcare costs for a per case of HIV, those benefits really outweigh the harm of perhaps about 1,100 people getting a false negative result because the sensitivity was just a little bit not good enough. And so that led to FDA requiring the company to make really clear messages about repeat testing, as well as how to interpret a negative test. It doesn't mean if you have a negative test, it doesn't mean for sure that you are negative and that you should repeat testing. So those are the messages. And so next slide, please. So even today, only 40 countries, and this is from a survey that was done by WHO, about 40 countries have a policy for self-testing for HIV. I think that many countries still want to have good reporting for statistics on HIV, and self-testing, there is this idea that a lot of people may not report, but if they want to seek care, they need to have their test confirmed. And so it's unlikely that people would not report. In any case, that's where it is now. So next slide, please. Now, with regard to COVID, in the beginning, when the Director General of WHO declared SARS coronavirus infections as a pandemic, he urged countries to test. He said that testing, contact tracing, and isolation are the backbone of how we could control this pandemic. And you could see on the right-hand side all the testing centers that have been set up to do the testing in a sort of specialized way, with molecular testing being the test that's needed. And so because for a new pathogen, we needed to look at every single case to know the clinical manifestations so that the reporting or the identification of cases could be more accurate. Because at first, all we knew was fever, cough, and shortness of breath. We didn't know anything else. So we wanted to identify as many cases as possible and look at the clinical case definition, refined it. And that's where diagnostics is really important at the beginning of the pandemic. And also at the beginning of any infection, like of an unknown pathogen, we don't have drugs, we don't have vaccines. Diagnostics is the only way that we can identify cases and control the outbreak. So that's how it started. Next slide, please. So this is the first phase, is we needed molecular testing. So to enable contact tracing, isolation, etc. Next slide, please. So that was March of 2020, but very soon, between March and April of 2020, we started to know that asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic individuals can transmit infection. And so every country was looking at whether they could scale up, and do mass screening. But I don't think any country could do that except very small countries. So there were a number of countries that did screening, like Singapore, Iceland, etc., and I think Slovenia, that did mass testing. But many countries, all they could do was to try and scale up molecular testing by asking academic groups to donate their equipment, and also the technicians that work in universities also come to the aid of public health. But still, it wasn't enough. And so antigen tests were developed, and antigen tests actually, even though they're not as sensitive, they could detect below the threshold of transmission. So the threshold of transmission is something like 10 to the 6 virus per mil, but the most rapid antigen tests can detect those. So it means that we could accurately, with some certainty, say that if a person is negative by an antigen test, that they are not at risk of transmission, which gives us a great tool to control the infection, right? Because these rapid antigen tests you could do anywhere. I remember the first one that I saw was in Singapore at a graduation ceremony at the university, and everybody did an antigen test before they went into the room. So there was a lot of thinking about how to use these antigen tests for I guess, for workplaces especially, and also to release people from having to have lockdowns, and so to use in schools, mass gatherings, etc. Now for travel, countries still want to have a combination of both, and some countries would only insist on molecular methods, and others you could use both. So that's the second phase. And then with the third phase, as I mentioned, next slide, please. Next click, please. Yeah. So with the third phase is in around September, October is when we had these new variants, and where the transmission was much faster than we thought, and there was no time to do any intervention on a top-down kind of scale. So we needed something that is community-based, and so that's when self-testing was being introduced. Next slide, please. And also, I think this model that was developed by Michael Meiner at Harvard really showed that more frequent testing with a quicker turnaround time to be able to enable public health interventions quickly is actually more superior than, is better than having a test that is extremely sensitive. So this is the turning point where a lot of country policymakers decided, okay, we could go with a rapid antigen test. Next, please. So how well can people do these tests? So I cited one of the studies that showed that for the self-test, the study that was done, I think this was in the US, and in professional use, it was 85% sensitive compared to a molecular method, but in layperson, it's 82%. But if you look at the people who have high viral load, then the sensitivity of these self-tests or rapid antigen tests are above 96% for both professional use and self-tests. So I think that allay many fears about whether people can perform the test well. But they did monitor how frequently people deviate from the protocol. And there was a lot of deviation, but none of the deviation really resulted in a change in the test result. So that was okay. And so we asked the manufacturers to explain the procedure better or use more icons rather than descriptions. And so about 80% of people thought that they could easily do the test. And so that led to the implication that maybe we could use self-tests to do more widespread testing, more frequent testing, and that we could try to end the pandemic that way. Next, please. And in the US, all the discussions started with November of 2020, where FDA started to approve the first home test, and then the government really wanted everybody to start taking more responsibility to do testing and to self-isolate at home as a way to try to control the pandemic. Next, please. And then in European Union as well, in the United Kingdom, they started in December to approve the first test, and then it was widely used and also made available free of charge. Whereas I think in the US, it costs money to buy, right? In the UK, you could get 6 tests a week from a pharmacy or from a clinic. And next, please. And also, people started to use it in all kinds of social gatherings. People who visit their elderly relatives would test beforehand. People who go to parties would test afterwards, or before or after, etc. So it was unprecedented the way that the test is being used in the non-health sector. Next, please. And in Europe, especially, I think the one that I'm more familiar with is Switzerland, where you can get self-tests free of charge through any pharmacy. And also, I think from many countries in Western Europe, self-testing became the norm. Next, please. And in Singapore, you could actually get these tests from vending machines, and you could get help with doing them if you needed help. And so that's an image that really stuck in my mind. Maybe we could have kiosks, these vending machines with self-tests for different tests, these different diseases, right? Next, please. So I think finally we got a WHO recommendation in March of 2022 to say that people could reliably do these tests, and that the main thing they want people to know is that it should be voluntary, it should not be mandatory, it should not be coercive. And this is something that is really important. And WHO is advising different countries on how to gather information about the pandemic with Sentinel site reporting, as well as using wastewater surveillance to look at the amount of virus in communities. Next, please. So this map from WHO, the green shows where all the countries that already have a policy for tests. And on the right-hand side, I listed the different ways that the self-tests are being used. A test to protect the vulnerable, a test to release from quarantine or self-isolation, a test to stay in schools and workplaces, a test to enable the resumption of mass gatherings, whether it's religious, music, or sports, and for travel, for economic recovery, and then a test to empower individuals to take more responsibility for their health and their part in the public health response. Next, please. And so this is just to say that during the pandemic, we saw the really expanded role of testing, and that we saw also we needed to have appropriate technologies for every single level of the healthcare system, and that not one technology could fit it would be fit for the entire healthcare system. That's a big lesson to learn. Next, please. And much more testing at home. So next, please. So in order to make sure that self-testing is as impactful as possible, there are many ways to make sure that our concerns about quality of tests, quality of testing, how to interpret the results, what to do about false positive and negative results, and also, fear of coercion and other unintended consequences, and also reporting. Different countries are looking at different ways to do it. Pharmacy-based testing is one. Next, please. There's peer navigation, where you could actually phone up a hotline and be connected to someone that you could trust to tell you how to do the test, as well as how to interpret the test or linkage to care. Next, please. Or proctored testing, where you actually have someone taking you through the testing and watching to see that you didn't do anything wrong and help you interpret. Next, please. Or do it through an app, so that you don't need to interact with another person and completely in the privacy of your home. Next, please. So what are the future for self-testing for other infections? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about monkeypox. It's a bit too late now, but still never too late, because it's going to be with us for a while yet, just like the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. Hepatitis C, we already have good oral tests for hepatitis C. And so for the elimination of hepatitis C, to make sure that the tests are accessible to every population and to reduce stigma, this is really important. For sexually transmitted infections, there are already, WHO is already working on some guidelines for this, because I really push for this. And I show on the right-hand side a picture of a molecular test that is not instrument dependent, and it's very simple and gives you good results for chlamydia, gonorrhea, and trichomonas in 30 minutes by just clicking 1, 2, and 3, those taps, 3 taps on the right-hand side. And then for mosquito-borne infections, to know whether people have dengue, Zika, and chikungunya, that would be very useful as well. And also for reducing antimicrobial resistance, a simple rapid test to distinguish between bacterial and viral infections like CRP would be really good as a home test for moms with children with fever, right? And so those are, there are so many things that we could have self-test. We need to not only advocate to governments, but also do demand generation from the public in order for these to happen. Next, please. So if we want to go towards leaving no one behind in 2030, when we try to achieve the sustainable development goals of universal healthcare by 2030, then equitable access to quality diagnostics everywhere would be really important to enhance the quality of care, especially in places where laboratory infrastructures are not good. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Rosanna. It's really clarifying, and it's enlightening actually to see all these possibilities that we see ahead, and how a pandemic, actually a chaos or a chaotic situation, brought us to this level to think a little bit out of the box with all the possibilities that one interesting tool like self-test can bring in terms of access to other situations. Any question? We can have some questions now or pose after the 3 presentations.
Carlos, I have one.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rosanna. I think it was really, really very, very interesting to hear from you again. And the question is, I mean, this is great. We have self-testing, but countries are taking so long to approve self-testing. So, I mean, what can we do to speed up the pace?
Yeah. Before the pandemic, the Wellcome Trust funded me and David Heyman, who actually led he chairs the emergency committee at WHO that advises the Director General what to do. You know, he calls the, what phase of the pandemic we should. So David Heyman and I have been working with different regional groups, including Aladif, to look at how to listen to what are the barriers. Why are we taking so long for every innovation to get into the hands of users? And so one of the things that we always wanted to do, and we did it actually with Seeker, was to get regulators, policymakers, and subject matter experts into one room with statisticians, figure out the risks and the benefits, what would be the acceptable risks of, false positives and false negatives for the benefit that you're going to get. And then say, okay, what should be the threshold for sensitivity, specificity, and how big a trial, what kind of data is needed for a regulatory approval and policy development, and set all these up. Then we could get, through the Wellcome Trust Project, we also formed regional networks of labs that could do evaluations because they have biobank of specimens. And so what we've done since that, during the pandemic, we couldn't do too much, but we did do a lot of education of regulators and policymakers about COVID tests. And through that, we actually, sort of put that idea into their head. And so now we have a health technology coalition platform that we use for this purpose. And one of the things that we're doing with, and David Heyman wants me to do it with monkeypox, to get countries together to say, for monkeypox, what should it be? And I thought, well, that's a little bit too late. I want to look further, and I want each region to take one diagnostics through this process. And so in Africa, we know that there's the African, meningitis belt of Africa, which are about 16 countries. Every year, outbreaks of meningitis happen and babies die. And still we have very poor diagnostics that because the diagnostic can only work on the cerebrospinal fluid, and you can't take those out in the field or not even in a small hospital. So quite often these epidemics don't actually get identified until 2 or 3 months when somebody sends somebody, somebody who could take CSF samples and then take them to a lab. And then to deploy the vaccine, you have to then take it to have it confirmed by a lab in the UK or France in order to deploy the vaccine. I mean, this is way too long from beginning to end. So we want for Africa to take that. And there is a urine test, but everybody says, oh, urine's not very sensitive. Well, in an outbreak situation, I'm sure it's good enough, right? To at least make sure that you can identify the outbreak early. So we want to discuss through the coalition, and it's a virtual platform, so we can get people just to come in and discuss how good that urine tests need to be, how sensitive, how specific, what are the mitigation for false positives and negatives. And Gavi is already on board because they want more faster deployment of vaccines. And so there's now funding to get this sort of development and evaluation approval of this urine test for meningitis. Hopefully in a year instead of like 10 years. But of course, for each region, they may have a different priority. But for Africa, it's very, very compelling to use this kind of platform to discuss, and I think for many sort of tests for antimicrobial resistance, that's going to be really important. And in fact, that's why Jeremy Farrar, the director of Wellcome Trust, funded us to do this, was for AMR, actually, for tests for AMR, like the simple rapid test to distinguish between bacterial and viral infections. Yeah.
So knowing that it could be very variable in development, what would you say is a reasonable time frame for development from beginning to end?
I would say that if we could line up as many things as possible where the specimens are, so for the urine test, there is already one that was sort of in development, but because there's no consensus on how good it needs to be, nobody's working on it. But if we really want to try it out, I think within a year, we should have this whole thing done. Maybe that's still not fast enough, but maybe when there's an outbreak, it would be used. Yeah.
Thank you, Rosanna, for your presentations. One of the big issues that we have seen with the deployment, not the development, but the deployment of rapid tests is the fact that very often regulators let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And the number of meetings I'm sat on where they said, well, sure, we'll accept the rapid test so long as it meets the performance of the lab test, which, yeah, exactly. And it's one of those things where what I find fascinating throughout the pandemic, but also going forward on rapid tests is this demonstration that you can get very valuable information from a test that is perhaps imperfect, perhaps not as good as a lab test, but nevertheless, it can be extremely valuable. And the other thing that has shifted, and this still needs to shift in some people's mentality, is this idea that people won't be able to handle the result. And that is something that it was a big debate on the HIV tests. Even before the OraSure test came out, we had rapid blood tests, with blood drop. And the biggest concern was, what's a patient going to do with that kind of result? I think that one of the things that we've seen during the pandemic is that today the populations around the world are able to handle a result. They by and large, they can manage this. At least for infectious diseases, it's a non-issue. So that's really a big advance. And I think that, like you said, what we need is a process to get these rapid tests out there quickly, because the development, that's not the issue. It's really the deployment that keeps holding us back. Go on.
That is a great point. And in fact, I wrote an editorial for Lancet Global Health to say the devil is in the details of the implementation. Just developing the test, getting it approved, getting the policy done is nothing compared to all the trials and tribulations of implementation. But I also want to say that in order to convince governments to put more infrastructure into the implementation, or for there to be more grassroots level demand for the test, so that because when I was in Tanzania once, I was looking at you don't test or treat? They say, no, we ask the women to go to the store in the town, in the village. Sorry. So the store that sells Coca-Cola, plastic buckets, brooms, they sell injectable penicillin because they know that the clinic is always short of them. So we need the private sector to actually also be part of the solution, right? So I think post-pandemic, with this pandemic treaty that is being discussed, there should be many more public-private partnerships, not only for the development of the test, but also for all this implementation.
Thanks a lot. Actually, you gave me several good tips now to start, and actually to bring a little bit of what we have learned again with the pandemic of COVID and how the self-testing. Yeah, Veronica is not going to work. Yeah,
Too far.
yeah, too far. Thanks. So, and Aladiv next. Yeah, no. Next.
Maybe you go there.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, we have learned a lot with the COVID, and COVID has brought, unfortunately, terrible numbers. There you can see it's an updated figure of how many deaths, how many cases we have found positive globally. And that impact actually led to, I would say, with governments, WHO, and several other entities. Next. And the impact, you can see it was big everywhere, everywhere. Some regions felt more, some others probably felt less, but again, equity in terms of diagnostic was not equal. So you didn't have equity. Next one. And some regions were really testing a lot, but the ones who needed the most and actually were without vaccine were really in the last numbers. Next. There was even an initiative to have a test tracker and carried this, showing really very interesting numbers. Next. What you can see here is that the tests that were being more used were really for the regions that have more access, basically Europe, North America, while Africa was really having almost no access to most of the tests and getting actually just in the last few months, some countries. Next. What we see is that it was really important. WHO Director General made a point here in March 2022, next, showing how important was really next to have self-test. I'm not reading there. It's just by memory because it's impossible. I'm getting old and you probably can't see either. But basically it's showing how important is really to get this empowerment to the population to complement the service that the state is trying to provide in such a chaotic situation. So we have in diagnostics the benefit of having so many different solutions. It's a portfolio of solutions for all the different situations, environments, kind of person, kind of moment, and so on. Next. The recommendations of the WHO came also, as Rosanna pointed out, showing that self-care interventions for every country and economic setting is critical, exactly to help in reaching universal healthcare coverage. And that's not only for one situation, but for many others. So if we see how many people are without access to healthcare, if we are able to have new kinds of self-testing, it's really going to make a lot of difference. Next. And this innovative way of finding out things was possible, for instance, with the ACT-A group, which is a joint effort by WHO, UNICEF, FIND, in order to accelerate access to vaccines, to drugs, and in our case, to diagnostics. As you can see, again, it's a kind of constellation of different entities. Aladiv also was invited to take part, and we did work in several working groups, and bringing to a very well-prepared forum the discussion on how to be prepared for this specific pandemic, but what is the legacy that we can leave behind in terms of different approaches to, let's say, old problems. Next. Diagnostics is indeed one of the key pillars for reaching solutions in different cases. And it really brought a lot of different achievements, not only speeding up process for innovation. So there was, and FIND was in charge of that, supporting different manufacturers globally in order to support not only for molecular, but also rapid tests and antigen. Next. You can see how much was invested and procured and how many tests, over 150 million tests delivered by this initiative. In total, we were looking for over 1 billion tests that could be needed at a certain time. Next. The fact is that inequity is a problem. If you see, Africa was testing, let's say, number of tests per person, like 77 times less than North America or Europe, for instance. Next. So this gap was really a problem. And in terms of timeline, next, we were able to have several key landmarks to develop rapid testing, trying to reach antigen with a reasonable price through this kind of commitment from public and private sectors in order to procure large volumes and distribute. Like Rosanna said, there is no health if someone is left behind, especially when we talk about this connectivity that the world has. One person is here. Jesus was in Japan the day before yesterday. He's here. We were from Brazil, coming also here. So this contact is bringing not only happiness and expertise, but also, unfortunately, can bring other problems as well. Next. So this kind of initiative was really important to develop, as I said, different initiatives in different technologies. Next. And also to promote the discussions in R&D where it was needed, market shaping. So to discuss also what are the kind of environments that we are looking for that could enhance the access to healthcare, procurement, not only in terms of integrity and compliance, but also how we can leverage volumes in order to make it interesting for the industry to also devote some time and efforts to come with extra or different solutions. And deployment, like it was said, deployment is really important. How we can assure that the test is coming to those who really need. Next. This presentation is going to be left for you, but it's very interesting to see the progress and how we could really reach several key points. Next. And even trying to take to low and medium income countries access and how we could engage. And also touching one very interesting and important part, which is the cultural aspects behind the real deployment and incorporation of this new devices and tests. Next. So in terms of accelerating, it was really important because we could show that most countries are deploying self-testing strategies to complement the testing efforts that were already there. And some were even ramping up funding and production. The wide range of implementation approaches in terms of pricing, reporting systems, integration, and access points, we saw so many different testing centers, opportunities, multiple user segments, like not only school, workplace, entry of events, traveling, community, but also we could see an integration of data that could report this for epidemiological purposes. So we saw that there was a good space, but it was not equal for all. So still with LMIC countries, we still saw some limitations and several points that should really improve in the next few months and years. Next slide. Here, next. A good example that I bring, and I'm very glad to be with Augusto here, because he was part of this strategy, and we had the discussion in Brazil when in early 2020, how we could actually have access to the few diagnostic tests that were being developed. Most of them were from Asia. Our regulation was too strict because they didn't have enough evaluation studies in terms of what was required. There was an issue. Most of these manufacturers were not known. So how we could assure, last but not least, how we could also guarantee that there was going to be properly deployment of the test, massive testing. Next. So in order to guarantee access, we discussed with Anvisa, and very quickly they came with a very good solution, which was a kind of emergency use authorization. So instead of the 10-year registration period, they would grant 1 year for those products that would come with a minimum set of documents. But if they would, the missing ones, they could be upgraded to the 10-year period as a normal registration. So, and they had also a fast track. And I think it was over, Augusto will complement later, but I think it was over 1,200 registration requests that they got. And a large number of them were granted registration, some were fact is that how we could actually assure that the quality was going to be okay. So with the blessing of Anvisa, we set up this program of evaluation of kits. And next slide. With a coalition of 13 public and private labs under the umbrella of the Clinical Analysis Society, Clinical Pathology, the Lab Association, and the In Vitro Diagnostic Association, and with support of other stakeholders. But we were able to have one single protocol for evaluation in all the 13 labs that had access to patient samples. So we got over 50 suppliers evaluated and more than 16,000 samples used for this protocol. And we could give 3 outcomes. First, to the market, a performance indicator in terms of sensitivity and specificity, accuracy, negative and positive predictive values for those Brazilian patients in each of the cases of the products. The second byproduct was to Anvisa itself. Whenever there was a complaint, they could have access to this database with raw data and could take a decision based on that. And third, for the manufacturers, importers, they would have a very important decision to make upon these results. If they could improve the test for the next batch, or even if they would keep or not going with that specific product. Sometimes the decision was, oh, it's not good enough and I cannot improve, so I will give up. It was a very interesting and public product. It's listed in the website. It's testcovid19.org.brazil, and it's really working as a very good example. Next. Massive testing then became the problem. We took always for granted that 6,500 hospitals in Brazil were enough together with 18,000 labs. This would cover the whole population, 220 million people. It was not true. And thanks to a discussion with Anvisa that authorized pharmacies and drugstores to deploy tests in their premises, rapid tests, we could see that it really made a difference. Throughout the 2 years, not the 88,000 pharmacies that we have in Brazil took part in the program, just a little bit less well, Abrapharma, that is the big pharmacy association, has around 20,000. Out of their 20,000, they had almost 5,000 taking part. The other large number are independent drugstores. We don't have the number, but those from Abrapharma, 5,000 pharmacists, they deployed over 20 million tests. This 20 million tests with a prevalence of 30%, let's say that probably the 20 million, 3 million could go to a lab. And the labs were overloaded anyway. So 17 million, probably 5 million people actually got the information that they were positive. They could stay at home, warn their contact tracers, make the contact tracing, and also search for therapy if it was the case. So it showed that indeed we have a lot to do in terms of homework to reach these invisible patients. We have to consider new spaces for healthcare. We have to really consider new tools. And again, complementing the existing tools, we have one extra one, which is the self-test. Next slide. Next. So in this way, next, we have been discussing a lot what to do. And Abrapharma showed, for instance, in the case of the COVID, that 1 in every 10 patients that had some kind of symptoms like fever, they lost smell or taste, they were actually only 1 in every 10 were positive. So many of the people that were tested positive, actually they had minor symptoms or no symptoms and they were positive, which means that they wouldn't go to a lab or to a hospital, but they would still be carrying out the infection. Next. Next. So you see all different places that were actually found during the pandemic. Next. And going even to faraway places. Next. Yeah. And this is actually causing what? A revision of the existing regulation in Brazil for labs where rapid tests are included. So point of care in general is now under a discussion, a very important discussion on how they can actually complement healthcare assistance in different ways, in clinics, pharmacies, drugstores, on a permanent way. So that's part of the discussion. And again, without jeopardizing the fantastic work that labs have been doing so far, actually complementing and getting this extra mile. Next. So in Brazil, pharmacies and drugstores are a healthcare, they have healthcare unit status according to the law. And what they are trying to do is really to go this extra mile by offering several different ideas like telemedicine, self-care, adherence to treatment. These are part of the protocols that they are trying to support the population to go after, and even rapid tests and vaccines. So they now can even give shots of vaccines as well. Next slide. So as Rosanna said, one of the key points for self-testing is really to give empowerment to the population. And that's a fantastic discussion. Next. We thought that in the beginning, people wouldn't be able to carry out self-test by themselves. But come on, people use a smartphone. In Brazil, they do income tax through the phone or the internet. They have access to so many apps. How come they couldn't follow the steps one by one and do the self-test? That was a discussion that comes from a long time ago. There is a lot of prejudice there. HIV, we're going to have now a presentation by Mariana Vilares from Ministry of Health and following up. But also WHO has recently recommended, besides the HIV, now HCV in 2021 as a kind of self-testing as an additional approach. Next slide. And we have really a benefit in several different situations. If we empower the population to self-care, we can really do this extra mile that we are still missing. In the case of HCV, next slide, this is HIV. It started some years ago, some initiatives like pilot programs like A Hora é Agora, trying to engage specific groups in order for them to look for self-care, which was really successful. It led to a discussion with the Ministry of Health and Anvisa how to implement HIV self-test. Anvisa was really very proactive and internally discussed and came with a resolution for that, creating an extra regulatory tool, which is the usability assessment. Usability assessment gives a very good perspective of how a lay user is going to deal with that device and make the manufacturer to do some corrections or adaptations in order to have the best outcome. This is valid for HIV already. It was valid for COVID. Next slide. And by the way, just this year, besides the normal volume procured for the public programs, which I think it's over 8 million tests per year, it's a large number. This year, they are in the process of procuring 1 million rapid tests, self-tests for HIV to be distributed in public programs. And this is extra to the volume that is in the pharmacies and drugstores, which is still low. I mean, there is still not a large use of self-tests in pharmacies, unfortunately, but we do believe that with COVID experience, this is about to change because people, by being empowered, they learned that they really can take hand and control of their own life and future. Next slide. HCV, and that's COVID, yeah, which I just told. Next slide. Yeah. Pharmacies, we had over 6 million tests, self-tests sold in pharmacies. Again, in the case of COVID self-test, there was not so much by public programs. It was very limited, although the Ministry of Health and the states have distributed rapid tests. In the case of self-tests, it was basically only sold in pharmacies. It was a long discussion. It was really, again, needed that we needed to have the support of Ministry of Health and Anvisa, and it came in February, the resolution for that. Next slide. So the challenges for self-test implementation is indeed regulatory barrier, which is in the case of Brazilian experience, we need a specific regulation. So Ministry of Health has to show that there is a public interest, and Anvisa then replies and then they discuss and publish. So for HCV, there is a current study going on, I'm going to talk about, and the usability study. The fact of awareness is going to make the difference. Price versus scale plays a role. In order to be accessible, we need to have scale. Public versus private, or public and private markets together. That makes sense. Lack of trust in rapid tests and self-tests, I think that's about to change. And opposition by labs. That's still seen in some places or countries, but little by little, I think they will see this as an entry door to the healthcare system, which is indeed the truth. In the case of HCV, 15,000 samples have been distributed for a protocol in 5 different cities, basically reaching vulnerable situations or populations. The challenge in Brazil is to find HCV infected people. It's a silent disease. And why? Because we do have treatment available. That's fantastic. But if we don't have the knowledge where the patient are, what is the point? So there's going to be probably in the future the same pathway for self-test for HCV. Next. And for the future, next. We're going to talk about genomic surveillance, and that's going to be NGS. So it's going to complement all these efforts of self-tests, rapid tests, molecular, and NGS with sequencing, so we can really control where the new variants are coming and where they are locating. Next. Next. For AMR is going to be a whole difference. And I will leave this for the discussion, which is one of the initiatives that we can have exactly to change a little bit the situation. And some ideas that can really make a better future if we work together. So I stop here and I would actually invite Veronica to set up the presentation for Mariana or
It is actually
Leticia?
going to be transmitted via the Zoom platform
okay.
from the team based in
yes.
Brazil. So
Yes, and we
Leticia, if you
leave
can
the
help with that.
questions afterwards. Yeah, okay. Yes, okay.
thank you. So
Thank you.
Leticia, if you can help us over there.
So just while the video is being uploaded or shown, Mariana Vilares works for many years in the Ministry of Health, and she was responsible for the implementation of the HIV self-test program by the Ministry of Health. So they have been doing, it's a fantastic group that we have at the department called DCCI and responsible for the lab area. Mariana, the floor is yours.
Olá, pessoal. É prazer compartilhar.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to share a little bit about the experience in Brazil of distribution of self-testing of HIV in public health.
A gente vem fazendo desde
So I'm going to present what we have been doing since 2018 in Brazil.
Bom, primeiro contextualizando pouquinho sobre o
So
HIV.
first of all, to give you a little bit of context, in Brazil, we had approximately 936,000 people living with HIV in 2020. Out of those, 116,000 were undiagnosed, so about 12%. We have in Brazil a huge social disparity.
A gente tem uma epidemia concentrada.
We also have an epidemic concentrated among key people,
Enfrentam barreiras de acesso.
people who face barriers to access to health services, and our epidemic is growing among young people.
Como exemplo da epidemia.
So as an example, we have some data here to present to you. So while in the general population, HIV prevalence is 0.4%, in other key and priority populations, this percentage is much higher. So for example, among men who have sex with other men or gay men, this percentage is of 18.4%. In female sex workers, 5.3%. In trans women, it could be 16.9% or higher. So these populations are affected differently by HIV epidemic.
E a gente vem desde 2012 fazendo
Since 2012, we have been carrying out several actions to expand testing and the reach to these key populations. So when we started to distribute auto tests and rapid tests in 2012, we had about 69% of people living with HIV diagnosed. And with the increase of the rapid tests, we reached 89% of the population diagnosed in 2021. So this is due to the implementation of rapid tests in public health. So we've seen this huge increase from 69 to 89% from 2012 to 2021. But as we get closer to 90, 100%, it gets more difficult to increase that percentage. So we need more strategies to focus on the target populations so we're able to get better results. So our challenge is to expand the diagnosis. We have already 89% of the population diagnosed. So how do we do that? What are our strategies?
gente tem?
So how do we expand the diagnosis? Since we have a concentrated epidemic, we need focus. Since we have vulnerable populations with difficulty accessing the health services, we need accessibility. And that's why the HIV self-test contributes to these goals and is a very important strategy, and has been a very important strategy since 2018. According to the WHO recommendation, the HIV self-test represents another step in line with efforts to increase patient autonomy, decentralize the services, and create demand for HIV testing among those unreached by existing services. So since 2016, WHO has been recommending that the HIV self-test be offered as an additional approach to HIV testing services.
Falando pouquinho do autoteste de HIV especificamente, né? O autoteste
When we talk about the HIV self-test,
no qual a pessoa
it is actually a process in which a person collects his or her own specimen and performs the test and interprets the result either alone or with someone they trust. So this is an additional strategy for those who do not want to be tested in front of other people. It's also another option for those who do not want or cannot be tested in health facilities.
saúde, permitindo que os
The test also provides autonomy so that people are able to decide where and with whom they are going to be tested.
aumenta bastante
So this basically increases the options and the capillarity of testing. It expands the options of testing so that people do not have to go to health facilities, so the test can go to them. An important information is that the self-test does not provide a definite diagnosis.
precisam realizar
Those who have a positive result have to have an additional testing and validate their testing from a trained facility. So they have to go to a healthcare facility to have
ter o seu
a complete testing and have a definite diagnosis.
tempo do autoteste de HIV no
This is the timeline of the HIV self-test in Brazil. So in November 2015, Anvisa, our regulatory agency, allowed the product registration, which was not allowed before. And then in May 2017, a year and a half afterwards, the first HIV self-test was registered in Brazil. In November 2018, the Ministry of Health launched a dedicated website with several pieces of information regarding the HIV self-test. And then in December 2018, we launched a pilot project within the public healthcare system to distribute the HIV self-test as a public policy. In January 2020, as a result of the pilot project, we expanded the distribution to the whole country, and that actually became a public health strategy. In April 2020, we expanded even more the recommendations because of the pandemic. So we noticed that a lot of people were avoiding going to healthcare services because they were afraid of the exposure. We did not have any self-tests being done anymore. So we started to incentivize and wanted to expand the self-test within our key populations.
com a estratégia de
So how do we work with the distribution in public health? So the goal is to reach undiagnosed people. Our focus are key and priority populations that are not reached by the healthcare services. And we have two main strategies, which is the distribution outside healthcare services, and also the secondary distribution, so that people are able to give tests to their peers and sex partners. So what are our strategies? The first strategy is for PrEP users, we want to offer the self-tests so that they can give them to other peers and sex partners, because people who are PrEP users are at more risk, and they are people who socially are in contact with other people that can benefit from the strategy. So at each consult, this PrEP user can take an additional 5 tests to distribute. Another strategy that we have is the distribution at places of sociability of key populations, either by healthcare teams or NGOs. And we've seen a very interesting results with NGOs because they're able to reach those key populations. These people sometimes have difficulty accessing healthcare systems, and NGOs have easier access to them. So NGOs and healthcare teams are able to go to these places and distribute the self-tests for the people, and also additional 5 self-tests so that they can distribute for other peers and sex partners. We also have the secondary distribution for people tested in healthcare services. So even though people go to healthcare facilities, they may not be the first focus. So they can be actually arms of the healthcare system to take the self-tests to other peers who can benefit from this strategy. And this can be for people who go to take their test, or people who are under treatment and they are able to take tests to bring to their partners and peers. So these are some pictures to show you some of these strategies that we have. We have the distribution at the healthcare service in São Paulo. That's picture number 1. Number 8 is the distribution of tests at a samba school rehearsal in the city of Rio de Janeiro. Number 7 is a distribution of tests during a PrEP appointment. We also have distribution at a trailer in the city of Florianopolis. Number 4 is a report on a newspaper, a story on a newspaper. And we also have distribution of sociability places in the city of Salvador. And number 3 is a picture of the Gay Pride parade in the city of São Paulo. So for us, all of these strategies are important so that we get closer to those key populations, so that we are able to get to those 90, 100% of diagnosis that we are not able to reach via healthcare services.
And also, like I said before, our strategy is based on people who receive self-tests can get 1 for themselves and up to 5 tests to take to peers and sex partners, which is our secondary distribution. What did we do for our implementation? To work on information and communication, we developed a guideline. So it's a document with the guidelines for distribution of self-test in Brazil. We organized ourselves so that our health services would prioritize people that would get to the service saying that they have a positive self-test. This is a very important strategy because considering that the HIV self-test is an additional strategy to reach people that don't get to the health service units. So we want to structure services so that when one person gets there and says, hey, I had the self-test done and it's positive, we don't want this person to go into a line or tell them to come back tomorrow. So we need to be able to be organized enough so that when someone comes to the health system and they say that they had done the self-test, they need to be supported immediately because it's someone who we won't be able to bring back again easily. So it's a very important strategy for communication and information. We have a service available 24/7 for phone customer service. This isn't an information that is present on the test. So a person can call any hours of day and night. It is a free call. They call that number and they can get help with doing the test or help with the results as well. We have information with pictures, step-by-step, showing what are the materials that come into test, what are the test procedures, everything with pictures to make it easier for the user, and also with units as to images as how to interpret the result, positive or negative, and how to throw away the test. It's important at home or in another place that is not a health service by people who are laymen, that they have the entire information so that the test is performed correctly. And in the same information, in the same leaflet, we have the information that the treatment in Brazil is free from our public health system and what to do in case you have a positive test result, so that people have enough information as to how they should proceed. This is an item that we consider to be extremely important when we talk about self-test. It's self-care, so that people have a self-test of whatever it is. They need to know when, how, and how to proceed. Most importantly, how to proceed after they get either a negative or a positive result, since they are not inside the health system. I brought more information as well as to the website that we created specifically for self-testing for HIV. So we have key information on HIV self-testing, where to obtain a free HIV test, instructions and demonstration videos. So you can click and you can see the video on how to do it, so you can follow the tutorial. FAQ session, which are very important. They are added, or we add to it whenever we see the need for additional information, promotional material that everyone can use, and we have a questionnaire to evaluate users' experience with HIV after they perform the test. There is a QR code, and on the box and on the folders, they can use the QR code and they can answer what was their experience with the HIV self-test. And we also have online monitoring panel anyone can access, and it shows the distribution of our self-tests in our public health system. Talking about quality, all health professionals, NGOs, and everyone in the team were capacitated. We have periodic meetings with health teams involved in the distribution of the tests. We have monthly meetings to discuss customer service calls. And then we understand what's going on, what are the more critical problems, what are the questions, so that we're always trying to improve the information that the user gets. I can tell you now that by far, the main question that we get on customer service is reading time. If I can read the time a little bit later after the recommended time, and the answer is always no. So this is by far the question that we get. All tests are registered by Anvisa, which is a regulatory agency. Each new acquisition that we do is we improve the requirements for each new acquisition. And on our monthly discussions, we always talk about that as well. Whenever we need to improve something technically, we always improve this technical information so that we can buy the best tests available. And we also have a quality analysis of all batches delivered to the Ministry of Health. So since we have a centralized procurement, and from here we distribute the batches, any batch that we receive before it goes into our warehouse, we analyze it by the National Institute of Quality Control and Health, INCQS. So all products go through this institute. Regarding monitoring is very important for us to be able to update our strategic decisions, update our policies, because it's through the information that how everything happens that we're able to do the adjustments so that we can provide better tests and more quality for our users. So we have two types of monitoring. We have a monitoring of test distribution, which is done through an anonymous form filled by the person who takes the self-test, which is from 1 to 5. not necessarily the person is going to perform the test. So this is the monitoring for the distribution. And on the form, we have information of demographics, sexuality, and previous testing information. They are all registered in a form and paper, which then goes into our monitoring system. So this is the distribution monitoring. And we also have the user perception monitoring, which is the one I already mentioned before, which is the user that performed the test. They go into our website, they use the QR code that we have, or they go directly into the website and they answer a few extra questions that will tell us how do they feel performing the test, other than demographic, sexuality questions, and previous testing information as well. This questionnaire is also anonymous. Both of our questionnaires are anonymous. About our results for distribution first. So this first part that I mentioned, the distribution monitoring. So here we have a timeline of the self-test distribution for HIV in our public health system. We started the pilot in December 2018, but we had just a few tests distributed, so we didn't include them here. And until July, the pilot was already happening, but we didn't have a lot of training, which we did in July. So you can see that it started to grow a lot after that until December. In January, we expanded the use of self-testing. We expanded the distribution to the entire country. And in the previous months, we had a great result. In March, we had the pandemic. The test distribution dropped a lot, just like the performance of tests in health services. And then we started to have efforts specifically to increase the distribution of self-tests, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, since it is an important strategy to replace testing for people who were not willing or didn't want to go to the health services other than health professionals because they were overwhelmed with other activities. So we had a few recommendations to increase the distribution and use of self-tests in the country. And we can see they've had a very big increase. We had a highest usage in August, and we didn't have enough tests in our central stock. You can see that there was a bit of a reduction because we didn't predict that we would have that many distributed. So we had a new procurement in March next year, 2021. When the new tests arrived, if I'm not mistaken, it was in April, then the number started to grow again, and it stabilized around 20,000 HIV tests being distributed monthly by our public health system. This is a timeline of municipalities that distributed self-tests. So in blue, we have municipalities that distributed in that month. In red, municipalities that were distributing the tests for the first time. So we had a lot of them. And the green line shows all municipalities that distributed self-tests at least once. So here we have 256 municipalities in Brazil that distributed HIV tests at least once a month. This is an important number, but of course, we still have a lot to do. We have over 5,000 municipalities in Brazil, so we still want to reach many of them with this strategy. Here are the results of the monitoring of the distribution. This data specifically is until December 2021. This year we analyzed, they didn't change a lot, so we maintained these slides in the presentation. We had until December 2021, 441,849 self-tests for HIV that were distributed, almost 150,000 forms that were filled. Each person can get up to 5 self-tests, and some interesting analysis that we had. The age of the people who were getting the test. So we can see that 20% of people were between 18 and 24 years old, and 22% were between 25 and 29 years old. So in total, we have 42% of self-tests distributed to a population between 18 and 29 years old, which is the young population and is the focus of our distribution. About the last time that they had been tested, we can see that the first bar shows that 20% of people who received the self-test had never been tested for HIV before. So this is a very important number. And we're reaching people who have never been tested before. If we check the younger groups between 18 and 24, this percentage goes to 28%. So it is a very expressive number. About race and color, we have pretty similar distribution, with 49 being white and yellow, 50% being black. Indigenous population is still very low. We're trying to increase that. About gender identity, we can see that most people that are getting HIV self-tests are gay and other men who have sex with men, around 50%. And I would like to highlight here as well that even though this percentage is still small, 5% of people who are trans, it's a very big, it's a larger percentage than the percentage that we have at health systems. So we're also trying hard to increase our reach in that population. And about the average of tests that were taken for peers and sexual partners, for people who are already supported in these services, which are in PrEP or in treatment, they take 2.9 self-tests. For people who are not in PrEP or in treatment, people who go to test, or if people who are in our actions, it's 2.3 tests that are taken per person. Now, switching gears a little, talking about our user perception monitoring, because so far I was talking about the distribution monitoring. So people who receive the test and fill out the form. Now a little bit for user perception monitoring. So the person who actually performed the test went into our website and filled out the form. This is a presentation that I did in a Congress in 2021. We had 813 answers. And we had very, very interesting data. 45% were men who have sex with men. Half was between 18 and 29 years old, a little bit more. 45% of those people reported having unprotected anal sex in the last 6 months. 32% were first-time testers, people who had never been tested before. That's also a bit higher than what we saw from the distribution data. And in the group between 18 and 24, we had 46%. So it's a very large number. We also had information with whom did you do the test? So half of people performed the test by themselves, 30% with a friend, partner, or someone in the family. 12% were assisted by an NGO member, and 8% were assisted by a health professional. So 20% had support, and 80% did by themselves or with some family members. And that also shows the importance of having a tool that you can perform the test without having a health professional and someone from an NGO, since it's a preference.
When we asked them with whom or how did you get the HIV self-test, 42% got it in a healthcare service, 38% received it in outreach strategies, so outside of the healthcare system, 4% bought it in pharmacies, because these are data that are available on our website. And so when the tests are available in pharmacies, people filled out that they bought it in pharmacies. 14% received from a friend, and 2% responded others. So you see that the large majority did not get the test in the healthcare service. 91% found the test easy to do, 98% would do it again, and 99% would recommend it to a friend. So this is a very interesting piece of information showing that the self-test is here to stay. People like it. They would incentivize other people to do it.
as pessoas que relataram ter resultado.
Regarding the people that reported a positive result,
O que representa
28 people, which represents 3.4%, reported a positive result. And out of those, 79% said that they had already gone to a healthcare service to confirm the diagnosis. So we know that this is little data. It's only 813 people, but this already gives us an idea of people that have already been using the HIV self-test, which is an additional and important strategy. The main advantages are that 72% reported privacy being important and 51% reported personal empowerment. So here are some conclusions and challenges. So the self-test is acceptable and easy to do. The self-test is able to reach the first-time testers, young people, and key populations. Information and communication is crucial to this strategy. I would like to add that the support from NGOs has been also very important to reach other key and priority populations. People prefer to do the self-test alone or with someone they trust. Most people seek confirmation after a positive result. And as for the challenges, the expansion to other cities, we know that we're doing it, but we have to expand that even more. And another challenge for everyone is to identify if the self-test is actually bringing new people to the diagnosis. That is a challenge because when we talk about the self-test, we are expanding our reach, but when we do that, we also give up a little bit of a control. So the self-test poses that challenge. If you want to keep control, you do not have a lot of reach. If you want to expand the reach, you have to let go of the control a little bit. So we have to do that if you want to expand the offering of testing to the population. And that relates to any type of self-testing. We have to let go of a little bit of the control of the information. That would be what I wanted to present to you. We are very happy with our strategy. We've been able to reach other people and populations that we did not reach before. So we want to expand this strategy inside our country. This is my contact information, and I am available if you want to get in touch with me. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Mariana, and thanks for all that have been following up. Unfortunately, we do have restricted time, so I encourage you to make questions for those who are in the virtual session to send by the chat box, and Leticia is going to concentrate and send to us. And for those who are here, I ask you to talk to everyone that is in the panel, including Augusto, that is the vision from a regulator also in the self-test challenge that we have. And to conclude this fantastic panel, what I indicate is that we do have many solutions in our hands. Self-test is a complementary tool. It's an extra tool that will give empowerment for the population that is willing each day more to look for self-care. And by going for self-care, what we do have is the break of the paradigm of looking and trying to treat the disease. Each day more, we have to empower ourselves in order to keep a better life status, to look for health promotion, to change our life status and lifestyle, I would say. And that's not so difficult. And in order to do that, we really have to promote the access to these innovative solutions by working together, public and private sector, with R&D and innovation, deployment, access, regulation, and that's part of our jobs. And I do think that if we go correctly in this pathway, we can bring this invisible people, patients to the system, changing really the future scenarios for a better outcome. That's, I think it's the legacy we can have from the COVID pandemic. We have learned a lot and we do need to put this in practice. So I close the session, passing the word back to Stephen and Sandra to complement and give the next steps for today. Thanks a lot. And thanks, Rosanna. Thanks, Mariana, and all that have taken part in this discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think it has been really very valuable and enlightening information that gives, provides additional ideas on many more things that are still to be done. And I think here we have a group of people that may get into a point where those things actually happen. So I think working all together, that is what we can achieve. So a lot of challenges ahead of us, a lot of lessons learned that we really cannot afford to lose. And that will definitely strengthen all of us. And of course, that will benefit the population in the world. So really, thank you very much. So we are supposed to be closing right now, but we want to run with a quick activity right now. We have, I'll pass the voice to Stephen. So thank you.
Thank you, Sandra, and thanks to all the speakers. Very nice and information dense sessions. And just noting that the way that we conduct the Inter-American Regulatory Coalition is that we typically have an external session and then an internal session. For this week's meetings, it was external only with a brief update on what we've done, and that we'll have an internal session later in the year to go through. And we may even convene a meeting before then to look at the many activities that are happening across the region. But I wanted to take this opportunity to introduce several very key people of relevance to AdvaMed and to the Americas and the work. Ashley Miller is the new Executive Vice President for AdvaMed in the Global Department, my new boss. And she is delighted to get very engaged in working with all of you in our work across the Americas, across all of the disciplines, regulatory, ethics, trade, diagnostics, IP. So I just wanted to give her a moment to chat, and then we'll move on to our other guests.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. And thanks everybody for coming to Boston. It's great to see everybody in person, and I look forward to meeting. Oops, she can't hear.
This way.
And look forward to meeting everybody during the week. So please feel free to approach me at any time and have it would be great to have a side conversation. The other thing I want to say is I had a great opportunity working with Stephen and the coalition to spend some time in Geneva in the end of September to talk about the importance of regulatory convergence from a global perspective and highlighting some of the work that's gone on in the Latin American region. We really had the ear of a lot of folks in Geneva. I think there's a lot of yearning for a positive message about steps that we can take coming out of the long arc of the pandemic to really move regulatory systems closer together. And we have a really important opportunity, I think, in the next couple of years. So thrilled that we've been able to put this partnership together under Stephen and Sandra's great leadership and really look forward. Regulatory convergence, one of the hard questions I got during the session was, everybody talks about it. Does it really ever happen? And, I said, it happens, but it's step by step. It has to happen and you have to have a lot of committed people with a lot of technical expertise. So really a huge appreciation to everybody that's keeping up the step-by-step work. And we look forward to a day when we have more and more convergence. And then if we have future pandemics, perhaps our global response can be that much stronger. So thanks, everybody. I look forward. Thanks again for coming to Boston and look forward to working with everybody.
Thank you, Ashley. And I want to introduce now our good colleague, Peter Ellingworth, who's the chief executive of the Association of British Healthcare Industries, ABHI. No stranger to AdvaMed and many of you, but as they look to ramp up their activities in the Western Hemisphere across Latin America, we wanted to have them introduced here and just stay tuned to be working more with them. But I wanted to give Peter some time to chat.
Thank you. Is it okay? You can hear me on this one? Fantastic. Well, it's a privilege to be able to join you, albeit briefly, at the end of the meeting. I have a colleague with me here today, Richard Phillips, sat on the side over there. He's a director of strategy. As Stephen said, we have a long-term collaboration with AdvaMed on many policy areas, and we find the relationship there of enormous value. As you will all know, that the UK is now not part of Europe. We are a sovereign nation in our own right. And as such, we've spent the last 6 years developing an extra piece of work to look at outside of the UK and how we can build new relationships as an organization. And we are very interested in Latin America. We do a lot of work currently in North America, and we would like to expand that work. It's a two-way street. The states that we work with in the US, it's very much about what we can do together. So that's bringing businesses to the United Kingdom. It's about sharing positions on regulation and collaboration around health systems. So thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to meeting colleagues here during the next few days. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Richard. And maybe just for the benefit of Peter and Richard and Ashley, just a lightning round. We did this at the beginning, but maybe just closing out, it would be helpful for them, I think, to connect names to faces to countries. So maybe starting with you, Christina, introducing yourself, your country, your association, and we'll just do a quick lightning round, and then we'll adjourn for lunch.
Hello, welcome. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm Cristina Murguetio. I am the Executive Director of Acetim, who is the Manufacturers and Importers Equatorian Association. We are very pleased to work here. And we aim to have strategies through the region. So we look forward to working together.
Hello again. I am Ana Riquelme from Mexico, Mexican Association of Innovative Products. We have 42 companies. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tamara Olmos. I am coming representing Amin as well. I am part of the Ethics Committee.
Hello, my name is Veronica Garcia. I represent the Regulatory Affairs Committee in AMIT too.
Hola, yo soy Jorge Daniel, soy representante de la Cámara Nacional,
Jorge Daniel, representative of the National Chamber
Cámara Nacional de la Industria Farmacéutica en
of the
México.
pharmaceutical industry in Mexico.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Stefan Ekmekcan. I'm the Healthcare Compliance Officer for MedTech companies for Johnson & Johnson in Canada. But I am here wearing the hat of the chair of the Compliance and Code of Conduct Committees for MedTech Canada, the Device Association.
Hi, it's a pleasure to meet you. Douglas Rodriguez, Regulatory Policy Head for Latin American countries at Roche Diagnostics.
Welcome. I'm John Beloy from Abbott Labs. I have responsibility for Latin America, the Middle East, and Canada.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Patricia Braille. I'm from Brazil. I here represent ABRAIDE, that is the Association for Distributors in Brazil. Also, I'm the VP of Institute of Health and Ethics of Brazil. And also I'm the CEO of Braille Biomédica, this Brazilian industry of medical devices.
Jesus without MedTech Europe, we know each other. Hi.
Hi, Peter, Janet Tronzo, AdvaMed.
Hello, Susan Suarez. I'm part of the MDRC project, and I'm the liaison from Colombia.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Christian Roata with Coal Mooring International and manager of the MDRC project.
Hi, I'm Tammy Stewart. I'm also with Roche Diagnostics, and I'm the head of regulatory policy for supranational organizations and foundational principles. Nice to meet you in person, Ashley.
Hi, my name is Rosanna Peeling. I'm a medical microbiologist at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, where I have a chair in diagnostic research. And I've been involved in trying to explore access, increase and accelerate access for diagnostics.
My name is Carlos Gouveia. I'm the Executive President for CBDL, the In Vitro Diagnostic Association, ABIS, the Alliance for the Innovative Healthcare Industries in Brazil, and also chaired Aladiv and Ethics Health and some others. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Sérgio Rocha. I am a president of Abraide in Brazil, distributors, and we have 300 associates.
Hi, José Márcio from Brazil. I'm executive director from ABIS. It's Alliance, the medtech sector. Okay.
Oh, my name is Augusto Gaia from the Brazilian Health Regulatory Agency. We are responsible for the medical devices registration for the Brazilian market.
My name is Marisol Sanchez. I'm Executive Director of Medical Device Chamber in Andy, Colombia. I represent manufacturers, distributors, and importers of medical device in my country. Thank you.
Thank you
No,
very
me,
much.
Peter.
Well, I'm sorry, Veronica, sorry.
No, Peter knows me. So, thank you.
Please. We all work for you,
Announce myself,
Veronica.
anyone? Well, I'm Veronica McBride. I work in the global department. I'm the manager for international conferences and meetings. I also provide administrative support for the global team. And I also wear a third hat. I am part of the programming team for conference and events.
Thank you very much. Well, that concludes the session of the Inter-American Coalition for Regulatory Convergence Medical Technology Sector. Thank you very much for bearing with us the whole morning. We encourage you now to enjoy lunch out in the hallway. We will clear the room. We will reset for the GMTA executive session. The GMTA board members will come in, and then probably around 1:30 or so, we'll have the broader GMTA membership come back. With that, thank you very much, and we look forward to following up with you in all of our homework.